You drive buses, not children's minds. Stay in your lane! The words hit harder than the shattering glass that started it all. In a room full of professionals, one man in a plain uniform stood silent, calm, steady, while the billionaire father of a trembling boy dismissed him like he was nothing. What Henry Stone didn't know was that the man he just humiliated was about to do what no doctor, no therapist, and no amount of money ever could. Because in the next few minutes, that same bus driver would reach a child no one else could touch, and teach a billionaire the one lesson his fortune could never buy. This is Hidden Black Echoes, where the stories of struggles are told, the rise and the voice of those the world tried to silence. If you believe real impact doesn't come from wealth or titles, but from patience, kindness, and heart, hit like and subscribe, because in the next few minutes you'll see how one man's quiet strength broke through silence and changed a boy's world in a way money never could. The glass shatter came first. Then the scream. It cut through the pristine halls of Brookshire Academy, sharp, raw, desperate, the kind of sound that makes every teacher freeze mid-sentence. Inside classroom 3B, chaos had taken over. Chairs overturned, papers scattered. A vase lay broken near the wall, and in the middle of it all sat a trembling boy, knees to his chest, hands clamped over his ears, tears streaming down his face. Oliver Drake, the billionaire's son, 8 years old, brilliant, fragile, terrified. Every teacher in that room had tried, voices calm, hands gentle, routines rehearsed, but nothing worked. The more they spoke, the louder Oliver screamed. The principal, Miss Reynolds, whispered under her breath, "Call his father." Within minutes, the sound of expensive shoes echoed down the hall. Henry Stone arrived, pressed suit, silver watch, and a glare that could silence a room. He wasn't just a father. He was the Henry Stone, real estate mogul, board donor, and the man everyone at Brookshire tried to impress. When he entered, teachers straightened instinctively. "What happened this time?" he demanded. "Sir, he had a sensory reaction," Ms. Reynolds stammered. "We tried to—" "You tried," Henry snapped. "That's all I ever hear from this place." He looked down at his son. "Oliver," he said, voice sharp. "Stop this, right now." The boy flinched at the sound, covering his ears tighter, rocking faster. Henry exhaled, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "I pay this school more than some people's yearly salaries, and not one of you can handle a simple meltdown?" The teachers exchanged helpless glances. None of them dared to speak. At that moment, a voice drifted from the doorway. Soft, calm, almost out of place in all that tension. "Excuse me, sir." Everyone turned. It was David Carter, the school's bus driver. Plain uniform, oil-stained hands, a gentle face lined by years of patience. "I was just dropping off the maintenance report," he said quietly, holding a clipboard. "Heard the commotion." Henry's eyes narrowed. "This is a private matter." David nodded respectfully. "Yes, sir. But maybe I could help." A ripple of disbelief ran through the room. The billionaire blinked, almost offended. "You?" he said. "You drive buses?" David didn't flinch. "Yes, sir. And I spend a few hours every day with your boy, on the way to and from school." Henry's expression hardened. "This is not your place." Ms. Reynolds hesitated, voice trembling. "Mr. Stone, we've tried everything." The billionaire's jaw clenched. "Fine," he said coldly. "You have 2 minutes." David walked in slowly, crouched down a few feet from Oliver, and didn't say a word. He didn't tell him to stop crying. He didn't lecture. He just waited. The boy rocked back and forth, eyes squeezed shut, gasping for breath. Then David reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver keychain, a tiny toy bus. He held it in his palm, the sunlight glinting off its roof. He placed it gently on the floor between them. A small sound followed, the soft tap of David's finger on the tile. Steady, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Tap, tap, tap. Slowly, Oliver's rocking slowed. His eyes opened, darting towards the sound. David kept tapping. Not loud, not fast, just enough to catch his rhythm. Then, in that same soft tone, he murmured, "Breathe with me, buddy." Like this. He took a slow breath in, out, then another. Oliver hesitated, then copied him. Inhale. Exhale. The screams faded to sobs. The sobs quieted into silence. For the first time in nearly 20 minutes, the room went still. David smiled gently. "There you go." "That's better." Oliver reached for the toy bus, clutching it with trembling fingers. Henry Stone stood frozen. The teachers were speechless. In less than a minute, the man everyone overlooked, the one no one expected, had done what a team of professionals couldn't. David rose slowly, eyes never leaving the boy. "He just needed something familiar," he said softly. "Routine keeps him steady." The noise here, the shouting, it scared him. Henry blinked, trying to process what he'd just witnessed. "How did you know that?" David's eyes were kind, tired, and knowing. "I didn't," he said. "I just listened." The silence that followed was different this time. Not tense, but humbling. Henry cleared his throat. "Thank you," he managed, his pride fighting every word. David nodded, gently placing the toy bus in Oliver's hand. "Keep that with you, little man. Whenever it gets too loud, remember the ride home." As he turned to leave, Oliver's small voice whispered something no one expected to hear. "Bus, man." It was barely a whisper, but it was words. And for Henry Stone, that one quiet word hit harder than any scream ever could. The following morning, the sky hung heavy with gray clouds. School drop-off was its usual chaos. Car doors slamming, teachers calling out names, engines humming. But inside bus number 7, there was something different. David Carter sat in his driver's seat, adjusting the mirror. Through the glass, he saw a small figure hesitating by the gate. Oliver Drake. The boy's backpack looked too big for his shoulders, his steps too slow for the rush around him. Teachers motioned for him to move along, but Oliver stayed still. Eyes darting between the noise, the colors, the motion that overwhelmed him. David opened the bus door and gave a small nod. "Morning, champ." Oliver didn't reply. He just stared, remembering. David held up the tiny toy bus from yesterday and placed it on the dashboard. "Your seat's waiting." For a long moment the boy didn't move. Then, quietly, he stepped forward. He climbed the steps one by one and sat in the same spot. 3rd row from the front, window seat. David didn't speak after that. He just started the engine, letting the low, steady rumble fill the air. The bus moved smoothly down the road, each bump a gentle rhythm. After a minute, Oliver began tapping his fingers on the window. Slow, even beats. David smiled. "That's it. Keep the beat." He tapped the steering wheel in sync with the boy's rhythm. By the time they reached the school, Oliver's tapping had turned into a quiet hum, a sound that wasn't quite a song, but it was something. That afternoon, Principal Reynolds stopped David in the parking lot. "I don't know what you did yesterday," she said, half in disbelief, "but Oliver hasn't had a single meltdown all day. He even sat through class." David smiled humbly. Sometimes kids just need the world to slow down long enough for them to catch their breath. The principal shook her head. "You might be the only one who understands him." That evening, as the last bus rolled in, a sleek black Mercedes pulled up beside it. Henry Stone stepped out. His expensive watch glimmered even in the fading light. He approached David, arms crossed. "My son came home calm today," he said carefully. "The teachers say you've been helping." David nodded. "Just doing my job, sir." Henry's eyes narrowed slightly. "My son doesn't trust people easily." "You managed it in one day." "How?" David looked out toward the playground, where Oliver's small figure sat under the jungle gym, tapping his sneakers softly against the ground. "He hears the world differently," David said. "Too loud. Too fast. Sometimes he needs someone who moves at his speed." Henry frowned, his tone skeptical. "You make it sound simple." David's gaze softened. "It's not simple. But it's human." For a long moment, neither man spoke. The billionaire shifted uncomfortably, unaccustomed to being humbled. "Do you have children, Mr. Carter?" Henry asked finally. David hesitated. "I did." Henry studied him, sensing there was more behind those words, but David didn't elaborate. Instead, he nodded toward Oliver. "He reminds me of my boy." Same quiet eyes. Same fight to be understood. Henry looked down, his voice quieter. "Doctors call it a condition. Teachers call it a challenge. You call it a rhythm." David smiled faintly. "Because that's what it is. Once you find the beat, everything else falls in place." Days turned into weeks. Oliver's progress astonished everyone. He boarded the bus without fear, kept a small journal of drawn patterns, and began to respond through sound, soft hums, claps, and gentle words. Teachers started using David's rhythm method in class, timing transitions with steady beats instead of sudden commands. It worked, but not everyone was pleased. Some staff whispered that a bus driver shouldn't be doing what specialists couldn't. Henry, meanwhile, watched from a distance, torn between admiration and discomfort. One evening, as David cleaned the bus, Henry appeared again. His tone was hesitant this time. "Oliver talks about you," he said quietly. "He repeats your rhythm at home. He even hums in the car." David chuckled. "Music's everywhere, sir. Sometimes we just forget to listen." Henry's jaw tightened. "I hired the best therapists. Paid for every expert. And somehow the man who drives him to school did what they couldn't." There was no accusation in his voice, just confusion. David met his eyes. "Maybe because I don't treat him like a project." Henry blinked. That answer cut deeper than David intended, but it was the truth. When Oliver's next meltdown hit, triggered by the blare of a fire alarm, it was David who arrived first. He found the boy crouched in the hallway, eyes wide, trembling. Without a word, David sat beside him and tapped softly against the floor. Tap, tap, tap. Within seconds, Oliver's breathing slowed. He reached for David's hand and whispered something faint, so quiet that only David heard. "Thank you." For David, those two words were enough to fill every empty space his own loss had left behind. And for the first time since losing his son years ago, he felt something he hadn't in a long time. Peace. If you're still watching, you can feel that moment when patience starts to work where power fails. Tap like and subscribe if you believe real strength whispers, not shouts, because what happens next will prove it. By the end of the month, the story had spread beyond the school. Parents whispered in carpool lines about the billionaire's son who finally smiled again. Teachers marveled at how the bus driver's rhythm calmed an entire classroom. And somewhere in the middle of all that talk, Henry Stone's pride began to crack. He didn't like it. The glances, the quiet comparisons, the way people spoke his son's name in the same sentence as a man who earned less in a year than he spent on a single watch. It wasn't anger he felt. It was discomfort. The sting of being reminded that all his wealth couldn't buy what came naturally to another man. So when a journalist called asking for a quote about the miracle bus driver, Henry's response was curt. "No comment. This is a family matter." That night, he sat alone in his study, scrolling through security footage of the school, footage his assistant had compiled after he requested every file involving Oliver. He watched the screen. His son boarding the bus each morning, head down, small hands clutching that toy bus. Then David Carter stepping out, offering a smile, a nod, a patient gesture that said more than words ever could. Henry paused the video. The quiet dignity in that man's eyes made him feel something he hadn't felt in years: inadequacy. The next morning, as David prepared to start his route, the principal stopped him outside the garage. "David," she said carefully, "Mr. Stone called." He looked up. "Everything all right?" Her face said it all. "He wants you off the route." The words hit harder than expected. "Off the route?" She nodded regretfully. "He says he appreciates everything you've done, but he wants to restore boundaries." David nodded slowly, taking the blow in silence. He'd seen this before, pride dressing itself up as control. "Understood," he said quietly. "When do I stop?" "Immediately," the principal whispered. That afternoon, Oliver waited by the bus stop, as always, his backpack hugged to his chest. When the door opened, it wasn't David's familiar face behind the wheel. It was someone new, a young substitute driver with nervous eyes and shaking hands. Oliver froze. The hum of the engine sounded different. The rhythm was wrong. He didn't move, didn't climb aboard, just stood there, trembling, until the aide gently guided him away. By the time Henry picked him up from school, the old signs had returned. Tight shoulders, blank stare, hands pressed against his ears. Henry tried to talk to him in the car, tried to repeat David's tapping pattern from memory. But it came out awkward, forced. The sound only made Oliver flinch more. When they got home, Oliver bolted straight to his room. Henry stood there helpless, the weight of silence filling the house once more. That night, David sat alone in his small apartment, staring at the folded bus schedule on his table. He'd been in this job for 15 years, seen hundreds of kids come and go, but Oliver had been different. The boy reminded him of Eli, his own son. The memory hurt. Eli had been 8, just like Oliver. He'd had the same quiet eyes, the same unspoken battles. A late diagnosis, missed signs, a world too loud for him to handle. One rainy morning, the bus had come too early. Eli had panicked, bolted into the street. David pressed his palms against his face, the memory too heavy to finish. He'd spent years blaming himself for not being there, for not listening sooner. And every time he saw Oliver, It felt like a chance to finally make right what he once couldn't. The next few days were hard. The school called twice to report Oliver's meltdowns. He'd stopped riding the bus altogether. When David passed by the school gate one morning, he saw the boy sitting alone on a bench, knees tucked to his chest, humming softly to himself. A teacher tried to comfort him, but it was clear he was fading again, shrinking back into the silence that had once ruled his world. David clenched his fists, torn between duty and heart. He'd promised to respect Henry's wishes. But how do you ignore a child who's crying for help in the only way he knows how? That evening, David wrote a letter. Simple words, plain paper. Mr. Stone, I understand your decision. But your son doesn't need me. He needs what I gave him. Rhythm, patience, familiarity. I hope you'll keep the music alive for him. That's all? David Carter. He dropped it off at the front gate of Stone's mansion and walked away. Inside, Henry found it later that night. He read the letter twice, then a third time, his hand trembling slightly. And for the first time in his life, Henry Stone, the man who thought money solved everything, realized that humility might just be the one thing he couldn't buy. The mansion was silent that night. Too silent. Henry Stone stood outside his son's bedroom door, listening. Inside, Oliver's quiet sobs drifted through the crack. It had been a week since David Carter's letter. A week since the boy stopped speaking. A week since Henry realized he'd made the worst mistake of his life. He knocked softly, but Oliver didn't answer. The toy bus still sat on the shelf, untouched, collecting dust. Henry stepped inside and sat by the bed. I know you miss him, he whispered. I do too. The boy's eyes flicked toward the bus, then back to the wall. His lips parted, but no sound came out. Henry bowed his head. I tried to do everything right, he murmured. Doctors, teachers, specialists. But I forgot the simplest thing, to listen. He reached for his phone and scrolled to David's letter again. Every line echoed with truth. He read it once more, then quietly whispered, I need your help. The next morning, a modest sedan pulled up the long stone driveway. David stepped out, hat in hand, humility in his posture. Henry met him halfway, words struggling to form. I was wrong, he said quietly. If you'll forgive me, my son needs you. David gave a slow nod. It's not about forgiveness, sir. It's about the boy. Together they walked upstairs. Oliver sat curled in the corner of his room, knees tight to his chest. The air was heavy, not with fear, but exhaustion. David crouched down, just like the first day they met. He placed the small toy bus on the floor, and without a word, began tapping softly. Tap, tap, tap. The sound filled the room like an old memory returning home. Oliver's head lifted, his fingers twitched. Slowly, he began to tap back, uneven at first, then steady. David smiled. There it is, he whispered. There's our rhythm. Henry watched from the doorway, tears gathering in his eyes. David kept the pattern going, gentle as a heartbeat. Then, for the first time in weeks, Oliver spoke. 2 small words, fragile but clear. Bus, man. David's voice broke into a quiet laugh. I'm here, little man. Always. Over the next hour, something miraculous unfolded. David hummed a soft tune, the same one he'd used on the bus every morning. Oliver began to hum along, matching the tone, the pace, the feeling. each sound connected like puzzle pieces, a bridge between silence and understanding. When the song ended, the boy turned toward his father and whispered, "Daddy." Henry froze. It was the first time in months he'd heard that word. He knelt down, tears spilling freely now. "I'm here, son." "I'm here." Oliver reached out and placed his small hand on Henry's wrist, then on David's. For a long, quiet moment, the three of them stayed there, a circle of rhythm, breath, and grace. When it was over, Henry walked David to the door. His voice was soft, stripped of ego. "I used to think education was about intelligence," he said, "but you taught me it's about connection." David smiled faintly. "Sometimes, sir, the heart just learns faster than the mind." As the car drove away, Henry looked back at the house, at the window where his son now stood, toy bus in hand, humming quietly to the rhythm of peace. 2 months later, the morning sun poured golden light across Brookshire Academy. Children laughed in the courtyard, backpacks bouncing, sneakers squeaking on pavement. For the first time in years, Oliver Drake was among them, smiling. He stood near the bus lane, holding his small toy bus. His eyes no longer darted around in fear. He waited calmly, humming under his breath, that same rhythm David Carter had taught him. The familiar yellow bus pulled in, the door hissed open. David's warm voice drifted out. "Morning, champ." Oliver's face lit up. He climbed aboard without hesitation, settling into his usual seat. For a moment, the past felt like a distant storm finally gone. Later that day, Brookshire Academy hosted its annual donors' luncheon. Parents filled the hall, teachers lined the walls, and at the head table stood Henry Stone. The man once known for his cold authority now looked different, quieter, humbled, grateful. He adjusted the microphone, his voice low but steady. "When I first enrolled my son here," he began, "I thought success was something you could measure. Grades, trophies, performance." He paused, scanning the room until his eyes found David, standing in the back wearing his bus driver's jacket. "I was wrong," Henry continued. "My son didn't need more tutors. He needed someone to understand his silence, someone who saw the child, not the diagnosis." The crowd listened closely, the room still as air. "That someone," Henry said, voice breaking slightly, "wasn't a teacher or a doctor. He was the man who drove the school bus." Gasps rippled through the room. David shifted awkwardly, not used to the spotlight. Henry smiled. "Mr. David Carter reminded me that compassion is the highest form of education. And today I want to thank him, not just for saving my son's peace, but for saving mine." Applause filled the hall. It wasn't polite applause. It was real, full, heartfelt. David simply nodded once, humility written in every line of his face. That afternoon, as classes ended, David guided the last group of children onto the bus. Oliver sat quietly by the window, tapping his fingers to their rhythm, the steady beat of comfort. Henry approached the door, placing a hand on the railing. "Thank you," he said softly, "for everything." David gave a small smile. "You don't owe me thanks, sir. Just keep listening." The bus door closed with a gentle hiss. As it pulled away, Henry watched through the sunlight, his son waving from the window, laughter bubbling where silence used to live. For the first time, the billionaire realized something priceless. The greatest teacher his son ever had didn't stand at a blackboard. He sat behind a steering wheel. If stories like this remind you that dignity has nothing to do with titles, uniforms, or class, hit like and subscribe. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next story, where quiet strength turns judgment into regret, and compassion finds its way home.